What is up, guys? Tom here. So in this video, I wanted to do something a little bit different. I'm going to straight up compare these two games since they're so similar but also extremely different in a lot of ways. So everyone knows Breath of the Wild and what it is, but just in case you need a quick refresher, it's this uber open world game where the reins are taken off the player to go wherever they want and do whatever they want in whatever order they want. This absolute freedom came with its own share of negatives that we'll get into, but at the time there was nothing quite like Breath of the Wild. So in comes Genshin Impact, which is basically take Breath of the Wild, inject it with exactly 1000% more anime, deeper RPG mechanics like leveling up characters and equipment, a gacha mechanic which in turn adds multiple unique playable characters, and a story mode that by comparison to Breath of the Wild is well presented, albeit with unskippable cutscenes, which to me is a cardinal sin, and a progression system that is in my opinion its biggest downside. But we'll get to that. The first thing I really want to compare is the basic gameplay. Both games at a glance are incredibly similar from a basic gameplay perspective. They both have this massive open world that you can explore at your leisure, but what are you doing in this open world? This is to me where Genshin has a distinct edge over Breath of the Wild. I'm gonna be straight, I hate Korok seeds. I hate climbing this massive mountain only to be rewarded with a Korok seed. So how does Genshin Impact handle this? Chests. Physical, tangible rewards. Any event that would reward you a Korok seed in Breath of the Wild, in Genshin Impact you're getting a chest of varying value. At the bare minimum, you're getting materials to level up your character and adventure rank, which is always worthwhile. You might get a weapon, which even fodder weapons can be used to level up your other weapons, which don't break on you. As far as the basic pick up and play gameplay goes, Genshin Impact has the edge, easily. I can just turn on the game, explore around, and find something worthwhile to do, and no matter what I do will reward me with progress or enhance my characters in some way. Now don't get me wrong, Breath of the Wild does have progression and tangible rewards such as new armors being prominent. However, getting a powerful new weapon only to have it break minutes later was always something that drove me crazy. Breath of the Wild's main activity you'll be doing are the shrines, which are 120 micro dungeons that reward the player with a goddess orb, which can be used to permanently increase your health or stamina, which is great. But I actually do have a problem with the shrines. Because of the abundance of shrines, major dungeons in the game are extremely simple and basically just bigger shrines, which to go back to Genshin's shrine equivalent, every single one that I've done is much longer, combining puzzles and combat in ways more similar to traditional Zelda dungeons. Now don't get me wrong, not a single dungeon in Genshin holds a candle to a classic Zelda dungeon. However, compared to Breath of the Wild, they're much more entertaining, albeit not as frequent. The last thing to compare about the moment-to-moment gameplay are the physics engines. Both games do have some fairly unique things going on with its engine. Breath of the Wild relies heavily on physics and interaction, for example using magnesis on a piece of metal in a thunderstorm to aim a lightning strike, while Genshin Impact uses a more elemental system, for example having one character use a tornado special, and another igniting that tornado with a fire special, creating a fire tornado. Both of these systems are great and well done. Zelda's system just creates better puzzle solving, while Genshin's is used much more for combat. It's used in puzzles as well, but it's much more combat based than Zelda's. So comparing the basic gameplay of each game, I personally have more fun with Genshin Impact. The element synergy system is awesome to experiment with and makes the combat in my opinion leaps and bounds more fun than Breath of the Wild. Not saying Breath of the Wild is bad by any stretch of the imagination, but with Genshin I tend to fight every single enemy I see, while in Breath of the Wild I only fight enemies if I have to, which tells me everything I need to know about the combat. The exploration is fantastic in both games since Genshin very directly rips off Breath of the Wild's model, but at least Genshin didn't butcher its imitation, and I enjoy the activities much more in Genshin Impact. So in this battle, Genshin Impact is the winner. I just have more fun exploring and fighting enemies in Genshin than I do in Breath of the Wild. So for this next section, I want to talk about the presentation, basically the graphics and sound of the game. So these two games are incredibly similar looking from a visual style. However, while Genshin goes for a more traditional anime look, Breath of the Wild has this almost watercolor look to it that I love. Breath of the Wild is one of the most visually appealing games I have ever seen, with one caveat: the performance. Breath of the Wild hits 30 FPS most of the time and even sometimes struggles to hit even that, while Genshin on a PC as powerful as mine or even most mobile devices can hit 60 FPS no problem, with the exception of the PS4 version hitting 30 FPS, which makes no real sense to me, but whatever. Genshin's performance on PC is almost unfair compared to Breath of the Wild. However, I do still much prefer the visual style of Breath of the Wild. On the subject of presentation, I do also want to compare the sound, both music and voice acting. So the music in Genshin Impact is fine. It's relaxing music while you're exploring and it picks up during combat, compared to Breath of the Wild where there's basically no music whatsoever except in towns, and when combat does pick up, it's a lot of beeps and boops with some exceptions. That said, the music in Genshin Impact wasn't particularly memorable, so Breath of the Wild wins this based solely on the nostalgic music that plays in towns and the incredible Hyrule Castle raid theme. Genshin's dub is good, surprisingly so. However, I care so little about the story in Genshin Impact that I was just praying I could skip the cutscenes the entire way through. While Breath of the Wild, on the other hand, has very limited voice acting, limited story in general, but it always felt like an event when a scene was voiced, so I just didn't want to skip it. Breath of the Wild wins in presentation for me. The gorgeous art style alone overshadows how much better Genshin performs, so I'm going to combine the last two sections into one for the sake of there being a definitive winner. So this last section is going to combine story and progression, basically comparing the main story mode driving us through the games. And this is also where I think Genshin Impact severely dropped the ball. So I'm going to talk about Genshin Impact first so you understand why I think this is the game's biggest problem. This game relies heavily on something called Adventure Rank, which is essentially a level for you, the player, which goes up at a snail's pace as you slowly go through the game. The reason this is an issue is because the story, which is all things considered a linear story mode, is locked behind this level which goes up incredibly slow. You can raise this rank by doing side quests, daily missions, ley lines, which are basically challenges scattered throughout the world, dungeons. However, many of these activities require something called resin, which is basically this game's stamina system, gating the player from finishing the game too quickly. Systems that prevent people from playing their game is always something that makes no sense to me. That said, the actual story mode in and of itself is just as good as Breath of the Wild, since it is a much more linear story. It allows for the story to be more, well, of an actual story. While the actual story, like the plot, didn't do it for me, the presentation of the story is fantastic, especially when the animation kicks up during a major scene, and some of this animation is incredible. Comparing that to Breath of the Wild's truly open story where you can do anything in any order you want with no restrictions, this allows the game to flow beautifully. The player is never locked or gated behind any kind of arbitrary number. The game gets progressively harder as you complete each of the 4 divine beasts, which the player can tackle in any order they want. This comes with its own share of problems from a storytelling perspective, but from a purely gameplay experience, this is far superior for the player. Plus, Breath of the Wild has excellent indirect storytelling, where the player is given breadcrumbs to piece together what happened on their own. This is something the Souls series excels at, which makes the story feel much more personal, despite how little is actually given to the player. I enjoy both methods of storytelling, and while I would prefer if the next Zelda game was a bit more direct like Genshin's, the flow of the game is so much better by not getting the player like Genshin does, so Zelda wins this one. And as a bit of a side note for Genshin Impact, I did not mention the microtransactions once, because my Genshin Impact experience has been 100% free to play, but for the sake of talking about it, yes, Genshin Impact has a gacha system not unlike any gacha game you might have played. And don't get me wrong, chasing Diluc has been like Ahab chasing the white whale and his awesome fire combos and fucking Phoenix Flame Ultimate. Regardless, my experience has been completely free to play, and I would even argue the game has been a little bit too easy. I've got about 20 to 30 hours into the game already and have rarely been challenged, which is shocking considering the usual predatory nature of gacha games. But this system has been much more like Xenoblade 2's if I had to compare it to something. Something that can give you an advantage, but is not completely necessary at all. For everything Genshin Impact gives the player free of charge, it's damn impressive, and with consistent updates, it's going to be something I'll be playing for a long time, assuming they fix the incredibly annoying resin system. Like hell man, I complained about having to grind, and the game won't even let me grind for long. But there you have it everybody, Breath of the Wild is still the better game, in my opinion, than Genshin Impact at this moment. Genshin Impact is amazing for what it offers for free and how it successfully replicates and expands on the Breath of the Wild formula, but removing some of the player agency for arbitrary stat numbers introduces a ton of grinding, which while not the end of the world, it keeps players playing, it definitely needs some fine-tuning to reduce the amount of grinding necessary just to progress the story. But here's the thing about Genshin Impact. It's a game that's going to get consistent updates with more story, characters, and even character stories, which I forgot to mention, but were some of my favorite moments in the game. Genshin Impact is an unbelievable game that I'm amazed launched in such a strong state as it is. I have full faith they'll fix the issues I have with the game, along with adding the skip cutscene button please, because I can definitely see me playing this game for a long time. And alright guys, thank you so much for watching this video, and I actually think I'll be doing more videos like this in the future. I can think of what the next Versus video will be, so if you enjoyed this, subscribe for more, and guys, give Genshin Impact a shot. What this game's achieved as a free-to-play game is raising the bar for games like this in the future, and I'm 100% positive if you enjoyed Breath of the Wild, you will enjoy this. You might just need to get through some cringe anime dialogue first. But thanks again for watching, everybody. Subscribe for more videos like this in the future, and I will see you in the next one.